These ruins are a remnant of a once thriving centre of learning and technology over 800 years ago. The Cistercians, with their skills and technology, medicine and organisation, were the global corporation of the 1100s and amazed and energised St Malachy to bring them to Ireland. They eventually arrived at Melifont around 1142 and were welcomed in by the local chieftain almost as a coming of an early form of inward investment from Europe.
King Donogh O'Carroll put 60 ounces of gold in a sack onto the altar at the opening of the monastery. I suppose it's a bit like the IDA of our day. These guys were expert farmers and they brought really advanced farming techniques. This area was regarded as waste, as very, very poor land. So that was his upfront investment to get the big continental corporation to move in here.
Although they were invited in, these new, austere, strict immigrant monks did not find integration with the locals easy.
There were constantly difficulties between Irish monks and British or English and French monks. And in many cases there were battles between them. And when inspectors came to visit them and sort things out, there were fights. There were actual fisticuffs and fights, and monks throwing stones at the inspector from the Cistercian order coming along to have a look at them. So unfortunately, there's very little of it standing much above ground level. Half of the lavabo here and the chapter house over there, which was part of the House of the Moors, where the monks would have got together and carried out their business and perhaps had meals. But all of these places were organised in very much, I suppose it's like corporations again. If you'd come in here as a Cistercian visitor from another monastery, you pretty well would have known where you were. You wouldn't have really had to have too much guiding. Everything would have been arranged in a fairly standard way. So this is just really the foundations of the church. We can see the bottoms of the pillars here. The church would have faced to the east end, would have been a massive big window at that end, facing towards the east. Really very, very large church, and with a massive crypt actually and down at the bottom here as well. The monasteries, the monks, the church performed really all the sort of functions that the state has these days. So if you wanted educated, you went to the church. If you needed somebody to read or write for you, you would have gone to the church. If you were travelling, you didn't stay in a hotel, you stayed in a monastery like this. You probably would have been travelling for religious reasons. If you were sick, you went to the monks, who introduced a lot of plants, which we still often find growing even on monastic sites. There's things like red valerian, grows on many, many sites. Roses were brought into Ireland from mainland Europe and used for making medicines, but they still, in many cases, are still growing on sites 600-700 years after they were first planted there. They've survived and continued.
The Cistercians, wherever they set up in Ireland, have left their mark on the landscape where they worked. They always sectioned up the lands where they helped farmers into what is known as granges, and that legacy can still be seen around their old lands today.
Very close to here we have Little Grange and Sheep Grange and Rough Grange, and world famously New Grange. All of these granges are monastic farms. The monks organised their farming very efficiently, grew a lot of grain, exported it to Britain, also produced cattle, produced sheep for meat, had sheep's wool. They created a lot of employment in the local area. They built mills on the river for processing the grain, also for processing wool. They controlled the fisheries. They exported fish, which were caught using the famous Boyne curraghs. The fish and nets, fish would have been taken down and sold in Dublin. So they really, really changed the character of the place, and they brought about massive economic development of the area. And eventually they ended up owning over 50,000 acres of land in counties Louth and Meath. This place was closed down in July 1539. The Cistercians obviously were thrown out. They hung around the area for quite a long time, I think down into the 17th century, and then by the 19th century the persecution of the Catholic Church in Ireland had stopped and they came back. So they're just north of Collin. which is why this place is often referred to as Old Melifont, because there is a new Melifont up at what was previously known as Mount Oriel, just north of Colin.
These ruins represented what was the first major inward investment on the island from the outside, and proved instrumental in changing methods of agriculture and education that would have lasting effects right through society. Through the knowledge and skills that were nurtured in places like this, Ireland would go on to repay that investment by having a profound and lasting effect on the history of Europe itself.